I had an experience just this week, Stacey, not quite the same, but I was essentially explaining some rather complex psychological states of being to a group of people. And I said something that was actually kind of dumb. I just said, any questions? And no one said anything. And then I came to my senses and I said, probably defensively, I'm like, y'all, this is brand new content. It's kind of complex. I know there are questions. What questions do you have? But
damn it.
Damn it. I was getting that nod effect as opposed to sensing the room ahead of time and saying, so table one, talk together for 30 minutes and come up with a question that's lingering at the table, right? Same thing. You get a nod in the room after you've kind of put an idea forward. There's resistance there. You've just not surfaced it.
Welcome to You Might Try This, a podcast about learning how to lead without losing yourself along the way. Hosted by executive coaches Stacey Philpott and Cade Cowan. This show draws on 25 years of experience working with high-level leaders and brings those lessons down to earth. If you're navigating leadership for the first time, managing people, questioning old rules, and trying to build a career that actually feels good, you're in the right place. This is You Might Try This. Honest leadership advice for ambitious people who still want to sleep at night.
So welcome back. I'm hoping welcome back is right. I hope when people listen once, they listen again. So anyway, welcome back.
There we go.
Today we're talking about a feeling that I think every leader has encountered. And I think when managers hit it for the first time, it just feels terrible, and this does not require like a big corporate reorganization or a massive new initiative. It can happen when, you just propose a new meeting date. It can happen because it's a random Wednesday. Essentially, you put something forward and you encounter resistance. That's what we're looking at today is what do we do when we hit resistance?
It's that moment when you suggest something, and people just push back, right? And, what does it do for us? It makes us our instinct is to then win the argument or push harder or explain why it's a good reason, right? But, that's not the best thing to do.
No. And I think we got to realize, in some ways, leadership's like physics, right? When you ask people to move, you're creating a degree of friction. And so resistance isn't a sign that you're doing it wrong. It's that friction that you're creating from asking people to move. But, it's really just kind of like a tax that you pay for asking for progress.
One of the things when I talk with leaders these days is about how hard everything is. They just feel so depleted, right? And they experience that resistance. And it kind of creates, like you said, physics, it kind of creates a counter reaction that's usually their stress response, right? So when you're under stress, you're a controller. I don't know who those people are, but let's just say they exist. You're a controller. You might double down, right? Try harder and be like, this is the way it's going to be. If you're an avoider, I know some of those people, maybe they go quiet, right? And what happens then is the team is watching you because you are the weather system for the team, right? They're not focused as much on the content of the change or even what you're saying. They're watching your emotional reaction and how you're reacting. And if you get defensive, there might have been just a mild breeze of resistance and all of a sudden it's a hurricane. And
I think I like that idea of like the controller and the avoider because, you said when we talked about delegation, one of the things that makes you successful in delegations is really asking, who am I? I think you've got to ask yourself that question here. Who am I when the resistance comes? Am I that person that, man, I just want to go harder? Or am I that person that's just going to be like, all right, do it your way. And I'm going to just go figure this out. Like, am I the avoider? Like, what is my dominant stress response? And I think those are probably too general, but that would cover a lot of people, control or avoid, right?
And it's really important to remember that when you exhibit your stress response, it usually is a stressor for someone else, right?
Yes.
It's a
Yes.
stressor for someone else. So I think it's interesting is, why do people, when they experience resistance, like you put something out there and people, come back and won't work, or we've already tried that, or that's a bad idea, or we can't, why is that so triggering for people? Because they get triggered, right?
Well, I think there are a number of reasons. First of all, if I'm suggesting something as the boss and you're resisting it, we've talked about that scarf model before. I think your status is threatened. I think your autonomy, what you want to be so, is threatened. So there's certainly those reasons. But I think also, so many people work in such a rhythm, such a cadence that they just want to get things done, right? They don't like to have things hanging out there. And resistance feels like kind of like an open loop. And there's this tremendous research by a Russian psychologist, Zygarnik. And basically what she observed was these waiters who could remember these very complex orders that diners would give. But they could remember the orders only so long as like the bill was still unpaid, like it was an ongoing experience. But once the diners paid the bill and it was kind of done, you go back and you ask these waiters, what was that order again? Gone. They're vanished. They've closed that loop and they've moved on. So I think so many leaders who have so much to do, they kind of experience resistance as this open loop. And how do I shut it down? Well, I'm going to shut it down by saying what I just said, just louder this time or more forcefully. I'm going to get you to agree.
Because resistance means it's not done yet. I can't close it off. It's going to keep taking my emotional energy. And I've got so many things open. I just want this to be done and closed down.
Yes.
Mean?
Yes. And if you're the boss, you've got power, right? So let's say now you come back with your rebuttal, you want to close that loop. So you come back with your rebuttal and, as the boss, you're happy when people just finally start nodding. Right.
Great. Because now I can close the loop, right? The order is done, right?
I can close the loop. They must know exactly what I want here. We're moving on. But we know that the nod is basically just like artificial harmony, or, it's just, they think it's futile. I had an experience just this week, Stacey, not quite the same, but I was essentially explaining some rather complex psychological states of being to a group of people. And I said something that was actually kind of dumb. I just said, any questions? And no one said anything. And then I came to my senses and I said, probably defensively, I'm like, y'all, this is brand new content. It's kind of complex. I know there are questions. What questions do you have? But
damn it.
Damn it. I was getting that nod effect as opposed to sensing the room ahead of time and saying, so table one, talk together for 30 minutes and come up with a question that's lingering at the table, right? Same thing. You get a nod in the room after you've kind of put an idea forward. There's resistance there. You've just not surfaced it.
It's true. And it feels bad. You can tell. It's sort of people are resisting by not actively engaging. I think what's interesting is so much of what we have been taught about resistance is that it's a sign of failure. Mm-hmm. So you've got that open loop where it's like stressful to me because I just want to close this and I want to be able to move on, right? It's an interruption. Wait, I thought we were already done with this. I mean,
it's a challenge to my status.
We're challenged to my status. And now you've got this fact of like, I'm failing because if you agreed with me and you were in the same place I was, we would be moving through this. And if you're not, it's a problem. Therefore, resistance is a sign of failure and it is my enemy and it is a problem.
Yes.
Right?
So we got to flip that script, right? Because if we think about the nod, what the nod is actually conveying is apathy, right? Mm. Okay, fine. That's apathy. And that we know is dangerous. Where resistance, I've heard you say before, and I love it, resistance is actually energy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, if people are complaining about something, it actually means they still care.
Yes.
And you have the opportunity to bring them in and be engaged and work hard. I mean, how many of us have known that the person who complains the loudest, when they turn, are the biggest champion?
That's exactly right.
Because you don't complain about things you don't care about.
Yes. I heard Ed Freeman, who's at the Darden School, University of Virginia. He's like the father of stakeholder management. Amazing guy. He said one time, when you get resistance, do research. Mm-hmm. And it was just one of those moments where it's such a pithy statement. And it's so true. When you get resistance, do research.
It is true. And how that research shows up, I think is funny because it kind of depends on who's sitting across from you. Like there are certain archetypes, right? Of like ways people resist, right? Like there's the skeptic. Those people always show up in companies that are very technical or have highly educated workforce, right? They're like looking for the holes, right? Like, well, this is why it's not going to work. I see it in pharmaceutical companies a lot, right? Like, well, here's what's wrong. And here's why that isn't working, right? Or you might have the protector. They're worried that something's going to be lost. So those are the people who say things like, well, we didn't used to do it this way. And, what about our people or the culture, right? They're different. And the kind of research that you would do with each of them is a little bit different, right? The way you engage them is different, right?
So let's talk about that skeptic. So we know that they're kind of looking for flaws in the logic. They want to look for that thing that's wrong. What's the research move there, Stacey?
I think it's asking them about how things could go wrong. So when I'm with the skeptic, I can be like, those are great points. What's the point of failure that you're seeing that I might be missing? Mm-hmm. What else is there? And then they're going to tell you everything you're missing, right? Because you've opened the door.
And there's a little bit of humility that I think you have to exercise in that moment, right? Like if I want to be really smart, I want to say to that skeptic, oh, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking that this and this and this. Like I want to show you that I'm as smart as you are, as opposed to, hey, tell me, what am I missing here? What do you see as the thing that I'm not seeing? What do I need to be aware of? There's a move there that's actually building trust, I think, with them. So I just think that's a subtext that's required in that research. What about the protector? These are the people that are worried about losing something.
Absolutely. Right. So we asked them, what part of the old way can we not afford to lose? Obviously we're going to need to change some things, but some things are enduring. Help me understand what is the piece that we can't lose and what is the piece that we can adapt. Making them understand that some things have to change, but not everything. And you're willing to protect or preserve some things helps them be open and helps them think more critically around, okay, well, obviously we can't just always stay the same, but what is important about being protected? And are there different ways to protect things,
There's another archetype in there. You might call them, the ghost. It's the person who will nod, who seems enthusiastic. We would call that a high leisurely derailer, right? But it's the person that nods, but who ultimately doesn't do anything different. They're just going to wait you out.
Yes, because they're looking at it going, this isn't going to work. And that person's going to leave this job soon. And I don't have to do anything. They're trying to kind of reduce the amount of effort extracted from them, right?
Yes.
So I think that the question there gets at pragmatism, right? What's the biggest gap between this idea or this plan or this change and your daily reality? How does this show up in your daily reality, right? That gets them like talking about things and you're able to identify, okay, what would actually be different?
Mm-hmm. And then I think the other one is just, we know them, we love them, the experts, right? They're protecting their status. You might be challenging something that they have been resting on for a while. Like you're coming up against somebody, maybe you're changing the process they actually invented. So they are the expert here. And that can be tough.
And I think those people right now with all the stuff going on about AI and how it's changing and threatening people's expertise, I think they're the people who experience a lot of stress right now, right? And so with them, you don't want to challenge their status, right? Or you may not want to in that moment. And so you might say things like, hey, you know the nuances of this really well, given your expertise. What am I overlooking, right? Or as a expert in this area, what do you see that's going to be important here? So engage them in their expertise. That doesn't mean yes or no to the idea. It just says, what could you bring as an expert to the work that we're doing together?
Something that I use with experts, and you and I face this all the time, right? As consultants, we go into an organization. There are people that have been there for 20 years. They can't wait to tell us everything that we don't know. And so one of the things that I'll use with the expert is I'll say, hey, as an outsider here, can you educate me, please? Can you teach me? And that works with an expert. They're happy to teach in many cases if you approach it correctly.
And I agree. And I mean, there aren't that many jobs more hated than the arrogant consultant who comes in and acts like an expert when they have no context.
Yes.
And what I always remember is the people who I'm usually working with, everybody has some level of expertise, right? And inviting it into the conversation means you're going to get to a better result. So I'll often say, hey, here's my point of view, but based on what you see, how would you think about this? Then you're getting like better problem solving and people are engaged, right? And you're starting to look at resistance, not like the enemy, not like failure, not a lack of competence, not a question of your status, but again, as that energy, right?
Yes. Energy
and creativity and engagement.
And the other thing that I like about that, Stacey, is just, when you say, look, here's a point of view that I'm formulating, but again, in the consultant context, as an outsider, I know that it's not complete. Help me understand, you're inviting the expectation that they're going to weigh in. And so honestly, it kind of helps you, and you're the threat to your status, right? Like you're just making the gathering of information and intelligence part of the conversation.
Well, I think I love what you're saying there because it looks at some of the kind of older social science research that was used a lot in marketing, where they found that people will value a solution. I think it was 63% more if they help build it. We call this the IKEA effect.
You're talking about the IKEA thing.
Yeah. Where when people are engaged in creating something, they're more bought in and they own it versus they can sit back and criticize it.
Yes.
Right?
So just for people who might not know the IKEA effect, Dan Ariely was one of the researchers on that. But essentially, they wanted people to place a value on a piece of IKEA furniture. And it was, pre-made. And then they actually asked people to assemble the piece of furniture and then put a value on it. And it was huge. It was 63% more value assigned to the thing that people had to build themselves. Now, the one thing that had to be true about that was that they did it successfully. Like, if the drawer wouldn't slide out.
I can tell you there's some IKEA furniture I have that I didn't feel was as valuable as what I paid for it. So I get it. I've been there.
I said one time, I can't remember the name. They have these long names, but I basically posted, I said, this actually is Swedish for this will take you all day and a 6-pack of beer. But that's that IKEA effect. The more effort that I put in on it, the more that I'm going to value it. And so it's the same with some initiative. This doesn't have to be a huge change initiative. This could be, hey, we need to meet on a different day of the week. What do you think? People value those initiatives more if they've had a hand in it. The old Betty Crocker cake mix story, right?
Yes, right. They could make because they were able to design a cake mix where all you had to do was add water. Right. And people didn't like it and they liked it much better. Right. The consumer research was much more successful when you had to add water and an egg, because then it felt like they were actually making something. Yes. Right. Yes. So even though it wasn't required, if you will, for success, it was for people to feel part of the process. And so part of what we, if you think about it as a leader is, I got to look for that egg, right? I got to find the thing that people are adding to this and not in a manipulative way, just like, how do I bring their energy into this? Right.
And I'm thinking as we were talking, like timing really matters here, rather than Moses coming down from the mountain with the tablets. How do you involve people earlier? I think sometimes people think leadership is formulating the idea in isolation and coming out and just wowing people. That's what Hollywood shows, right? The person working late at night and they do the board presentation and the board stands and claps. I have never seen that happen in one single meeting.
No, it's like a beautiful mind.
It never happens. And so I think timing is something that people should consider as well. When do you invite the resistance in? Earlier the better for the most part, wouldn't you say?
I do. And let's be honest, not everybody, there are some things that have to be confidential and you can't bring everybody in. And you can't bring everybody who wants to be involved all the time, and you can't bring people in as early as you want to. Those are realities.
Yes.
And sometimes people want to kind of co-author the whole thing, and that's not going to happen. So sometimes it's finding little ways to engage people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's one question to say, okay, what do you think about this idea? Or where are the places that as we execute this idea, it will impact you, and where could we make it more efficient in our rollout? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
That is a question where you're engaging someone, but it's a very different kind of question.
I think that is so important. My friend David always says, don't ask a question you don't want the answer to.
Is he a lawyer? They're always lawyers.
No, but perhaps he should be. But it's true, isn't it? Like if you say, what do you think of this idea? That's kind of a lazy question.
It is a lazy question. It is a lazy question.
And you are inviting input on the whole shooting match when that might not be what you want. So being very specific about what I'm asking for matters.
Mm-hmm. So what are the things that as a leader, where are the places you've seen people be able to ask questions, to have some input and begin to use that resistance as energy? Without it sort of overtaking it. Cause you're kind of balancing that desire for a closed loop. Like, I don't want to like implode this and ask everybody everything. But I know that if I don't allow some participation, no one's going to be bought in. It's something to balance. Like, what have you seen the questions that really work?
Well, one thing that I know that you and I have done is when we're designing a leadership development program, we'll often design 2 or 3 options and we'll ask the client, what about each of these do you like? And so we're opening up the conversation for input, but we're also putting a boundary on it. We're not coming with a blank sheet of paper and saying, so tell me what you think this should be. We're giving ideas, but we're also bounding those ideas by there are 2 or 3 options only. And we're saying, choose among these. And from there, you build a conversation. So that's one way. Like, have a point of view. Don't think of it as just completely a blank slate. And then from there, begin to ask the questions. That was one thing that comes to mind.
That's great. I think options is important. Another thing building off of what you just said is asking the question, what would make this better? Right? How could we make this better? Isn't saying we're not going, should we do this change? Because sometimes you can't ask that and it's coming down from on high and you have to do it. But you could say, what would make this better? Right? You can also ask people, you can ask others, what might others resist and what are they trying to protect? Right? Another good question is, as we make this change, what few things should we try to preserve? What will matter most?
Yes.
I think that can be a good question.
Yes. Right? I think also, the more complex the initiative that you're attempting to drive is simply acknowledging the trade-offs, by making this decision or by implementing this, what are we losing? Let's get clear on that ahead of time. Again, that's for the more complex situations, but I think that's an interesting question to ask as well.
I've never seen a restructuring in an organization that didn't require massive trade-offs and massive difficulties and have massive resistance. And what I think now is people are disengaged because they're tired. And so apathy is becoming the default response. So
because there's no energy for much else, right?
There's no energy. People are worn down and they're really tired. And so engaging people and saying, I know you're tired. What are the trade-offs? How could we make this better? It may not be ideal. What are some things that might help as we roll this out? I think those are pragmatic and real questions you can ask.
So, Stacey, to the point of the podcast, you might try this. And I think we've hit upon some things that people might try, but 1 or 2 experiments people could run?
Well, first of all, I would say, let's go back to knowing if the team is watching your emotional response, like the weather, know what you look like under stress. Right? Be very self-aware. If you can't come up with the 2 or 3 things you look like when you're under stress, go ask people around you. They know. They do.
You can tell me later what mine is.
Oh, I don't know what you're talking about. Right? So know what you look like under stress and know how that impacts people, because leading change is stressful and you've got to know what you look like and you've got to be aware of it. Second, know your triggers, right? What about change specifically is difficult? Cade, perhaps you're aware that I don't really like surprises, right? And I know that you know how to tell me something's changing, and it more often happens by email than by phone or in person, right? And you let me have my reaction because then I'm going to bounce back really quickly, right? So some of it is, what triggers you? I don't like surprises, right? They're really triggering for me. So know that. Those would be 2 things I know. Know what are your triggers that stresses you about change, and what do you look like under stress? What about for you?
For me, I can remember back in the day before we were chained to teams, and it was more conference calls. And again, I was in this global role running leadership development and stakeholders all over. And you'd have these big conference calls and you would put ideas forward. And, conference calls, it was just so easy for people to come off mute and start telling you everything that was wrong with the things that you had on the paper you were sharing. And I hope people don't think this is woo-woo, but I actually visualized myself in those moments when people started asking the hard questions, visualized myself saying, great thought, let's build on that. Can you tell me more? Because honestly, absent that, my defensiveness would kick in and I would get dialed up. And so I had to kind of put myself in that place, rehearse what I would say in those moments, and then say them. And it kind of comes back to that identity thing that you and I have talked about before. You're going to act your way into a new way of thinking rather than thinking your way into a new way of acting. And so by simply being ready with what probably sounded like mechanical statements at the time that I later learned to internalize through repetitiveness, it worked. So tell me more. Tell me more about your concern. That sounds really important. Help me understand. Opening it up like that.
Curiosity is the most disarming thing in the world.
I love that.
If you can be curious when other people are upset, there's almost any leadership situation that you can handle. And you know it when you've seen people who can't handle, stress with curiosity, they don't look as leaderly, right? So
yep. I love that. Excellent. This has been a fun one. Thanks, Stacey.
I agree. All right. See you later, Cade.
Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to You Might Try This, brought to you by EDC and Edgewise Media. To learn more about the podcast, visit youmightTryThis.com or connect with us on social media.